The world has always been full of manipulators, and it's only getting worse. The more that organizations and intelligence agencies and marketing departments, big corporations are able to get the data on how we think about things, how we feel about things, what we do and when we sleep, it all just feeds into these psychologically fueled algorithms designed to understand us better so as to manipulate us better. And in this age of social media, where people are willing to sell their privacy and their dignity in exchange for a few clicks, a few bucks from some of the big social media platforms, it seems as though we've raised a generation or two of narcissists, genuine narcissists, not people who have high opinions of themselves, but people who adore themselves, the attention that they get, who see everyone in their lives, including you, as entertainment, as fodder, as fuel for the eternal churning of their algorithms, just bait for more engagement. And this goes right back to the beginning, can point to the serpent in paradise. Very first thing that we see the serpent do is successfully manipulate Eve into doubting God just enough to doom paradise and doom humanity and lead to the broken world that we see before us. And we can even point to someone like Samson, who, even though he knew Delilah was trying to rob him of his strength, still let himself be manipulated by her into revealing his secret weakness. We can point to the story of Troy, how it finally fell. And people point to that story as if it's so ridiculous that the Trojans would let in this mysterious wooden horse. But it's not really that strange. Whether the Trojan horse literally existed or not, the weird part of that story is not how the Trojans acted. They wanted to believe that they'd won the war. They wanted to believe that the gods had bestowed their favor upon them. They were so desperate to believe the lie that they fell for a very obvious one. This is manipulation. It is everywhere. It is all around you and it is through your history. And one thing that they don't teach you is how to defend yourself against it. And everyone is vulnerable to manipulation. The person who thinks that they can't be manipulated is the easiest person to manipulate. A handy analogy that Chase Hughes has often used is take someone who doesn't believe in firewalls or any of that antivirus crap because they're smart enough to keep their computer from getting infected with malware. That person's computer, you know, is riddled with all sorts of malicious software. And it's the same with the human brain. If you think you can't be manipulated, you'll trust every thought that runs through your mind. You'll be too smart to fall for any of the obvious tactics that people use. And in thinking that, you become extremely vulnerable to it. It's important that you recognize what's going on here. It's important that you open your eyes to the world outside you and start to pay attention to all of the ways that people and organizations and systems are trying to manipulate you for their benefit. And you might turn around and say, "Oh, but William, isn't that what you're doing right now? Aren't you using fear or sense of urgency or desperation in order to manipulate us into listening to you?" There's a difference because no one goes through life alone. We're constantly influencing each other. But the thing that makes it so manipulative, as opposed to someone providing guidance or support, or people coming together to collaborate on something, what makes it manipulation is either the manipulator is too incompetent to know what's good for you, or doesn't care what's good for you. Now, on the competence angle, you can imagine a toddler trying to manipulate their parents into letting them all have ice cream for dinner. That is a question of competence, and hopefully the parents stand their ground. Because no matter how well meaning the toddler is, no matter how much they believe that this will be a good idea, the toddler is just not qualified to make that decision. But really, more importantly, are the people, the organizations, the systems out there who don't have your best interests at heart. There are marketers out there who hope that you will buy their product or their service without reading the fine prints, without ever using the material. There are people out there who want you to take action without thinking because they know that if you scrutinize things, even for just a moment, you'll realize that this is not what you want. This is not going to be good for you. There are entire industries built on predation, on installing problems into your mind and then offering to resolve them for you, as if that is some noble service, as opposed to being a leech, a parasite, some destructive force that can only thrive as long as the host, the target, isn't aware enough to fight back. Everyone can be manipulated, and everyone is constantly the target of someone's manipulation. But we do know that some personalities are more susceptible than others, and that there are some simple mental habits you can get into that will protect you. Not perfectly, but every layer of protection that you add between you and your manipulators could be the difference between you joining a cult and not, or you falling for another mass hysteria or not, you obeying tyranny or not, you following someone else's plan for your life, or follow your own plan for your life. These are important. These are significant. And while there's nothing you can do to make you immune to manipulation, surely I hope you can recognize that everything you do to improve your mental defenses is only going to help you. Now, there are some mental habits that people have, and one of them is where they get their ideas, their impulses, how they make their decisions. And in some circles of psychology, in say neuro-linguistic programming, one of the ways of classifying this is to talk about having an internal frame or an external frame. And the idea with this is someone with an external frame, their first thought when they come across something new is, what do other people think about this? Those other people might be their friends, or it could be their teachers, it could be the government, it could be the priesthood. Whatever it is, their first way that they sort ideas is by directing them to some external source by running them through some external filter. And if this sounds like it's incredibly naive or sheepish or cultish, it isn't necessarily. There's a lot of value in running things by what other people think because there's wisdom in the crowds. And hopefully, the community that you're in loves you and cares for you. And so, trusting in what they think rather than what you think is not necessarily as foolish a strategy as some strong spined stoic warriors might tell you that it is. But part of the problem comes because there's is whenever we're making a decision, whenever we're evaluating some idea, there's also going to be a secondary test of this. So we can talk about like the external frame as being where the idea comes from. And then there's either an internal check or an external check, which is like some secondary evaluation as to whether the idea makes sense for you. And so the ideas might be coming from outside your environment, or they might be coming from inside your own mind. But again, running it by what other people think can be an incredibly valuable and useful and successful strategy. And so this gives us two variables with two outcomes for each. You can get your ideas from inside your own mind, or you can get them from the outside. And you can then test whether those ideas make sense inside your own mind, or you can check them against some outside source. And of course, everyone does all of these. But people often gravitate towards one particular combination rather than the others. And so you can imagine someone who gets all of their ideas from the outside. They have what we'd call an external frame. And then when they want to test whether that idea makes sense, they check it against what other people or some institution, something external to themselves, thinks about it. You can call people like this out with the tide because the currents will direct them wherever the currents will take them. They have no or a very limited internal sense of what is right and wrong, what is true and false. But it's very much dependent on the ideas around them, the communities around them, the consensus. Someone like this is going to be very good at fitting in with the crowd. And before you point the finger and say, this sounds like my political enemies, they're all just a bunch of sheep who follow the. It is not a question of intelligence, and it's not a question of accuracy. Operating like this doesn't make you stupid. It just does mean that as long as you surround yourself with the best people and have the best standards that you can compare your ideas to, you're going to be fine. But anything short of that is going to make you very easy to manipulate. Because if you're out with the tides, then all someone has to do is direct the tides beneath you in order for you to end up going somewhere you would never have chosen for yourself. But the opposite of folly is folly. If having an external frame and then an external check makes you easy to manipulate, then it would be a mistake to think that the opposite is what you want. To have an internal frame where the only ideas that you trust are the only ideas that you seriously comprehend are those that come from within you. And then having that check, with the moment where you ask, is this true? And you determine whether it's true or not by looking inside and comparing it to something that you also think. Someone like this is wallowing in folly because someone like this, maybe it makes them harder to be manipulated, but it also makes it very difficult for them to learn, to gain the wisdom of others. The best ideas in their mind come from their own mind. And then they test whether these ideas make sense based on the qualities of their own mind. They check whether this seems true to them, whether it makes sense to them, whether it sounds right to them. So if their ideas come from inside, and then they check those ideas also inside their mind, then mentally they're cut off from the rest of the world. The ecosystem of ideas just doesn't exist. And all they have is everything that exists within their own internal experience. Wallowing in folly is a mistake. No matter how smart you are, you do not have the best ideas on everything. You need other people, the wisdom of other people, in order to reach your full potential. Relying too much on yourself is grossly inefficient. It's arrogant. It's insane in its own way. Because only by letting people in, only by letting new ideas in, can the fertile garden of your mind actually grow. And so, what about the other combinations? What if you have an external frame? So you get all of your ideas from outside your own mind and experience. But then you check that internally. You compare that to your own sense of what is right and what is true and what is good and what is beautiful. In this case, you're at school. Because at school, you will sit there and you will wait for your teacher to tell you what you need to learn and how you need to learn it. Now, having an internal sense of whether what you're learning is true and appropriate and good and worth learning is going to be very useful in this situation because the teacher might be teaching you nonsense, and having an internal sense of knowing what is nonsense will allow you to discard anything which is not going to be useful for you. But one of the limits of this approach is that you're not being proactive. If a teacher tries to teach you something which is not useful to you, and then you then discard it, then what? Well, then you have to wait for someone else. You have to find someone else who will teach you what it is that you need to know. And again, if you can find the right gurus, if you can find the right experts, if you can find the right teachers, then maybe this isn't such a bad thing. In fact, if you find yourself operating like this, like you absorb the wisdom of the universe and then filter it through in some internal standard, the best thing that you can do is to absorb better wisdom and to improve that internal standard. But even this is going to leave you subject to the quality of your teachers and the whims of your own heart. Having an internal check can be dangerous. Because remember, the heart is deceitful. So if you hear something and you think, this doesn't sound right, or this doesn't feel like it'd be a good idea, maybe you're right. Maybe that instinct comes from deep wisdom. Or maybe this is your own folly, your own biases, your own mistakes and prejudices just leaking through. Who's to say that what's going on inside you is actually a reflection of the truth of the circumstances? And that leaves people who have an internal frame with an external check. And I call these people mighty knights, because if you imagine a medieval knight, they will don their armor, they will raise their sword, they will march into heathen lands to conquer, to protect. But ultimately, they serve a lord. Ultimately, a knight is in service of some powerful and hopefully wise and compassionate ruler. They will do what they need to do out in the front lines, out in the wilderness, out beyond the boundaries of their lord's province. But they will also have in the back of their mind a constant test as to, is this what my patron, my lord, would want from me? Is this what he would want me to do? Am I acting in accordance with his wishes? And in medieval times, a distance of even just a few miles is going to be enough. That communication breaks down. You're not always going to be able to ask what your Lord wants. So instead, you make your own decisions. But before you take action, you test it against this external standard. Now, again, this does come down to the quality of that Lord. If they are cruel, if they are hedonistic, if they are foolish, then that is not a good question to ask. But luckily, you don't have such a Lord. Luckily, your Lord is far more powerful, far more wise, and far more compassionate than any human duke or prince. This is a really strong advantage that Christians have, and especially Western Christians, because we have this tradition not only of Christianity, but of Stoicism. And when I say Stoicism, just to be really clear, I do mean actual Stoicism, not the idea that you should switch off your emotions or anything like that. The idea that you should embrace clean living, that you should pursue wisdom, temperance, courage, compassion. Stoicism done right is the idea that you should carry your burdens without complaint and leave the world a better place than you found it. It's to live a life of good character, which is also an idea fundamental to Christianity. But as I say, we in the West have the advantage of having both woven into the culture of our ancestors. We can talk about the spiritual value of carrying your cross, and we can talk about the wisdom of the ancient Stoics when they talk about conducting yourself without complaint. These together have allowed the Western civilizations to thrive under very hostile conditions and to succeed in ways that no other civilizations in history have. It is why we are a beacon for the world, why historically we have done so well for ourselves, even as we were scratching the dirt, enduring plagues and invasions. tearing ourselves apart in civil wars. Through all of that, we only grew stronger because, as an external check, we had the wisdom of the Stoics and the wisdom of the Bible. So, an antidote, one of many, a defense against manipulation, is to make your own decisions, to have an internal frame, to have a sense inside you of what it is that you want, even when it contradicts what other people might want for you. It's to be your own man, your own woman, to establish your own boundaries, to have a really clear sense of who you are and what matters to you. And then, every time you make a decision, you can test it, you can check it against some simple questions. Like, is this biblical? And is this stoic? Because if the answer to both of those is yes, then it is probably a good decision. Good for you, good for your family and friends, good for your community. And if the answer is no, then you'll have to ask yourself whether that's really worth pursuing. So if you are the sort of person who finds yourself out with the tide, constantly following whatever the trends of your community are, constantly feeling as though you're adrift and very passionately following one project, one idea, one cause, only for the winds to change and you find yourself redirected to some other pursuit. Or if you find yourself wallowing in folly, as if the results that you should be getting in your life, based on how smart you are, how driven you are, should be better than this. But at the same time, you find that your thoughts tend to run in loops. You're not quite learning and adapting to new circumstances quite as fast as other people seem to. As if you're operating on the same rules, the same principles that may have served you in the past, but don't always conform to your new circumstances. I strongly advise you to set an intention to change that. Because even to be at school would be an improvement. If you do find yourself at school, constantly seeking new gurus, new experts, new books, new training programs, new sources of wisdom, and checking each one against your own sense of what is good for you, what is right for you, what makes sense for you, then one strategy is to seek out better sources of wisdom and have a wiser sense of what is good for you. But even there, I strongly recommend that you take a different approach. Because why be out with the tide? Why wallow in folly? Why even be at school when you can be a mighty knight? When you can raise your shield high and protect yourself and those precious to you from the manipulations of those who don't know what's good for you or don't care what's good for you. Having an internal sense of what is right and wrong, and then being able to protect yourself from your own mistakes, your own foolish interpretations, by constantly testing that against the wisdom of the Stoics and the Bible. That is how you protect yourself. That is how you protect the people close to you. Know what is true and embrace it. And seek to know what is true and what is good by following the wisdom that has been handed to you by your ancestors. the Bible, and Stoicism together are the best defense that you have, the best resource that you can check against. And you will not perfectly interpret them, and you'll not perfectly set an intention to, but you can do better than you have in the past. You can find yourself resisting the calls of the marketers and the fearmongers, the politicians, and the sociopaths and the narcissists out there in the world. You can ignore them, you can resist them, you can do what you know is right and what the Bible says is right, simply by following this simple mental process. Be a mighty knight. Know yourself. Know what is truly good. And know that you know this well as you test it against timeless and divine wisdom. And so being a mighty knight will help you tremendously. Having this mentality will protect you tremendously. It will help insulate you from the mass hysterias and the untargeted psychosis which is rampant in the world out there. It'll make you less vulnerable to the manipulations of marketers and leaders and intelligence agencies. However, as I say, this is not a perfect defense. If a person gets to know you and gets to know your, shall we say, psychological weak points, then the simple act of being a mighty knight may protect you or it may not. And sometimes the untargeted things just get lucky. A marketing campaign designed to bleed you from of your money just happens to get under your skin in exactly the right way. A political message just happens to be crafted so as to perfectly manipulate you. So you can be a mighty knight and still find yourself occasionally falling, unfortunately, as a victim for some of these other manipulations. That's why I've put together a guide on how to identify these weak points, these vulnerabilities in your psyche, how to recognize when someone might be targeting them, and how to bolster your defenses so that even someone who's targeting you specifically will find it much harder to manipulate you to their own ends. I'm giving away this guide for free. All you need to do is visit my website, antipater.page. Link below, link in the description, link in all the usual places. Don't leave your mental strength, your mental fortitude to chance. Train it, cultivate it, hone it, and then you will find yourself truly living on your terms.